Hey guys, before I start this video on Does Karate Suck? Kyokushin versus Muay Thai, let me give you a little background about myself and why I'm interested in this. So my background is I'm big into combat sports. I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when I was very young. I'm a black belt. I've been doing it about 23 years. I've been doing Filipino martial arts for the same amount of time, which includes combat stick fighting, if you've ever seen like Dog Brother style fighting. I've done Sambo for many years, and I also was very into Muay Thai for a huge part of my life. So I have a big combat sport background specifically. I've never really gotten into traditional martial arts. So I grew up in a household where my father had done karate most of his life. He had done Shotokan, but at the time I didn't know that there were different kinds of karate. I thought karate's karate. And I think till today a lot of people believe that, which is part of the reason I'm making this video. What's interesting is as I started doing combat sports at a young age and continuing through them, I started hearing about Kyokushin. I never really understood what it was. I'd come across people and they're like, I train Kyokushin, and I'm like, oh, that's karate. And they're like, yeah, but it's bare-knuckle karate. And it didn't really mean anything to me. I kind of just blew it off. And so I started eventually just looking for things to improve my Muay Thai, improve my combat sports base. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to go try a Kyokushin class. I've heard about it enough. It sounds interesting. A little background about Kyokushin. A lot of people have a misconception about Kyokushin. Kyokushin has produced a lot of very competitive fighters, dating all the way back. Guys like Bare-knuckle, their foundation was in Kyokushin. And when I say foundation, I'm going to say this a lot because they go and they train other things to complement their game. But that doesn't take away from what Kyokushin is. Guys like Bare-knuckle, you look at all the Dutch kickboxers, a lot of their bases come from Kyokushin, and Dutch kickboxing in itself stems from Kyokushin. You look at guys like George St. Pierre, Giga Chikadze in the UFC right now, who's an amazing fighter. There's a ton of guys. Andy Hug is an incredible fighter. One of my favorites of all time. Even Raymond Deckers, if you look at his style, is heavily influenced by Kyokushin. So there's a lot of incredible guys out there, and I can keep talking about them. There's a long list who come from Kyokushin bases. So the interesting thing about Kyokushin, and the number one criticism people give about Kyokushin, and it's one that I kind of agree with, but I will also state why it's not the most relevant thing about the style, is no face punching. Right? Because Kyokushin's a bare-knuckle fighting style. If you were going to go bare-knuckle every day, full contact in a combat sport, you'd have major lacerations on your face, which is actually what happened at the start of Kyokushin, which is why Masoyama said we have to make this something that people can train. So we're either going to put on gloves and be the same as every other martial art, or we're going to go bare-knuckle and just cut that out. And if you look at Kyokushin tournaments, this is the number one criticism people have, is it's two guys who get like face-to-face with each other. They stand at super close proximity, and they're just laying into each other, and then their hands progressively drop, or they start with low hands because they're fighting to the body, bare knuckle, and then a kick or a knee comes whipping up at literally this close. They're amazing at that. And that's actually a little cutaway here. The first time I trained Kyokushin, this is exactly what happened to me. I was fighting the guy really close. He was a little bit taller than me. He was super ripped. I'm punching him in the body. I don't know the rules really. It's bare knuckle fighting. So I'm like, I'm just going to punch this guy in the body. We're face to face. Out of nowhere, I didn't even see it. A kick just came, wrapped around, hit me right behind the ear, and I was on the ground. I'm like, how did I end up on the ground? So that is the common complaint about Kyokushin, is it almost teaches you bad habits in the sense that it teaches you to drop your hands because you're getting bare knuckle punched in the body. People aren't kicking up at your head every 2 seconds. They're definitely laying into you with these hard bare knuckle punches. So that's the criticism, and it definitely looks wonky when you watch Kyokushin tournaments. Why? For that very reason. Anyone who's trained any type of style of striking specifically, whether it's Muay Thai, boxing, kickboxing, you have range management because of the fear of getting punched in the face. The second you take that away, you incentivize people to get face-to-face and just do exactly what you see in Kyokushin, which generates a very strongman kind of approach to martial arts, which is whoever pushes forward more, whoever has more power up here, or whoever gets dumb and kind of doesn't realize that their hands are completely down, gets kicked in the head and gets knocked out. So some bad habits. I agree with that criticism. But I'm going to right away jump into what I think is the most interesting counter to that criticism. And it has to do with my style of fighting, especially even when I train Muay Thai. So when I train Muay Thai, I was what I would call a shell fighter. Some people might call it a bully fighter, kind of like rhino style fighter. So what I do is I get real tight on top. If you were bare knuckle, what it would look like is this, because I don't have gloves. But when I have gloves, I shell up. I don't want to be as reactive as other people. I don't want to have to start moving and dodging the punches and move like a boxer. I also don't love weaving too low because you get kneed in the face or you get kicked in the head. So I'm a very tight kind of boxer. So my elbows are tight. My hands are tight, protecting my head. I move a little bit side to side, but I'm trying to counter when your combination ends. What does that mean? The guy's coming in with jab, hook, cross. I'm staying tight, I check it, and then I launch my combo. It's almost like turn-based fighting. Nod to Eli, who's right over there, because that's what he calls it. So I fight like a turn-based fighter. I let you finish your combination, and then I start my combination right on the peak of your combination. When I feel your time, when I feel that hardest hit at the end, I'm trying to sneak in. Now, even if you continue your combination, I'm coming off of a specific punch, feeling that impact, boom. Or that jab where I'm parrying it down, now I start my combination, and I finish, and I shell up again. So I call it shell fighting. It's almost like you're shelling up, you're waiting for it to end, or you're waiting for that little opening, then you're kicking the leg, you're launching your cross, your hook, then you're finishing with a roundhouse kick. Now, if you look at one specific fighter, this guy Akimoto, I think he's fighting in ONE FC right now. All the top Kyokushin fighters, they make great shell fighters. They make great fighters who can cover up top, even though the habit is teaching you to drop your hands, and I'm going to jump into why. They are very good at covering up top, staying tight, being tough, moving forward through those punches, and then bam, whatever they need to do to open up their combination and out-condition you, out-press you, out-mentally tough you. Because that is what Kyokushin really teaches, which in my opinion, and this is the fundamental point, is the most important thing about fighting. The tougher, more conditioned person has the most large advantage over the other person. The skill advantage will not always compensate for someone who is more conditioned and tougher. And I even feel this in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a high-level black belt. I like to say high-level. I mean, there's this guy, Manisaurus. Cut away to the Manisaurus video right now of him kicking my ass. This guy's like outweighs me by 45 pounds. You can see it right here. He can pass my guard at will. And he's a world champion. The guy's a monster, highly competitive. But I get out-toughed. I get out-conditioned in Jiu-Jitsu, even against guys who are not Manny. It just happens sometimes that there's someone who's a super athlete and you really feel the difference. Even if they're a high-level competitive purple belt, they can just out-condition you and you do a couple of rolls and you're like, I'm done. And these guys can just keep going. It makes a huge difference in a fight. Kyokushin, by nature, makes you the tougher guy. And even more so than Kyokushin. People say, even more so than Muay Thai. People always say Muay Thai is the hardest conditioning sport. I'm telling you firsthand, I've done a lot of Muay Thai classes and I've done a lot of Kyokushin classes. There is a huge difference when you start getting hit bare knuckle hard in the body. And another difference is Kyokushin guys, in at least the classes I trained, very rarely would put on shin pads. Very rarely would put on any kind of protection. That was actually the appeal of Kyokushin, is you could just spontaneously start sparring. There was no preparation for it. I had a friend who'd been doing Kyokushin black belt. We were in a parking lot. We would just literally start sparring full contact Kyokushin fighting. You can't do that with Muay Thai. You got to pace yourself, be careful. You're not going to start punching your friend in the head. But in a parking lot, you can start going full contact Kyokushin fighting. It's really interesting. And so it breeds this kind of mentality of push forward, be the tougher guy, be the more conditioned guy, and be able to take the pain. More than Muay Thai. I know that's going to piss a lot of people off, but it is a harder conditioned sport than most Muay Thai training you're going to see today, especially in America. I'm sure there's gyms out there that have tons of conditioning, but there's no class I've been to for Muay Thai where every single time you train, you are trading full force bare knuckle punches to the gut. You are kicking each other in the legs full force with no shin pads and no protection. And then at the end of that class, you're doing round robins every single class, full contact with no protection. It just doesn't happen as much as people think in Muay Thai compared to Kyokushin, which is an important point. I've never been to a watered down Kyokushin class. I just haven't. I've been to watered down Muay Thai classes because Muay Thai has become very trendy, very fad-based. So you have classes that are appealing to doctors. You have classes that are appealing more to people who don't want to be fighters. You have classes that are appealing to people who don't want to get injured, don't want their fingers to be messed up. In Kyokushin, the nature of the sport is that you have to spar full contact. In fact, every single class I've been to had the same grading system, which is you get to white belt, you fight, I think it was like 1 or 3 people, I don't remember. You get to orange belt, you fight 3 people. You get to blue belt, you fight 5 people. And these are bare knuckle round robin fights. By the time you're black belt, you're fighting 10 people, or depending on the school, 20 people, bare knuckle, for a minute to 2 minutes each. And then there's guys like Judd Reed, who has done 100-man kumite, full contact, bare knuckle, 100 people, 2 minutes each in a row. You just don't see that kind of mentality in other martial arts. That's something very unique to Kyokushin. It is mentally the toughest sport I've done. It's designed to break you, to push you to new limits. And as much as people want to detract the value of that, it's again, in my opinion, one of the most incredibly valuable aspects of fighting. So yes, you take away the head punches, you generate guys who spar like this, but if they are smart, which a lot of Kyokushin fighters I've met are, they will go cross-train, and they have to cross-train very little because, again, they're not trying to become boxers. They're not trying to become Thai fighters. They're trying to shell up, be able to see punches, get used to them, and then unload on you and out-condition you. Kyokushin develops the best shell bully-style fighters that I've seen when they're really, really good at it. And again, this guy from 1FC, Akimoto, is incredible. And you watch him fight, I think he's going to be, I don't know if he's the champion now or he's going to be the champion. Excuse my lack of knowledge on every single combat sport. I'm big into UFC and other combat sports, but 1FC, I mean, I just tune in sometimes for fighters I really like. He's amazing. And he's not the only one from Kyokushin who's like that. Now, another important note, people always say it's not the style, it's the fighter. In other words, you could take Lyoto Machida, you could teach him anything, he'd be an incredible fighter. I disagree with that mentality. It might be true, but the way you train develops the way you fight. And again, so the positives and negatives of Kyokushin are incredibly relevant to what kind of fighter you become. What does that mean? It means that the bare-knuckle fighting aspects of Kyokushin are incredibly valuable. I had been doing Muay Thai for about 16 years the first time I tried Kyokushin. I boxed. I had done a lot of other combat sports. So you would think I would know how to throw a punch. I knew how to throw a punch. I knew how to throw a punch with gloves on, which is vastly different. People do not take this into consideration than throwing a bare-knuckle punch. So from a street self-defense point of view, unless you're going to palm strike people and you're going to use open hand stuff, which I'm not against, I actually think it has value. If you want to actually crack somebody in the head, you need to know how to throw a bare-knuckle punch. And one of the most interesting things to me in Kyokushin was it almost seemed counterintuitive. They'll take their fist, turn it down like this. I know this is blurry, but the fist will come on a little bit of a weird angle to align the wrist where I thought I would hurt my wrist if I was punching this way. I was like, I would never punch this way with a glove on. And then I started punching the way I punch in Kyokushin when I would spar, and my thumb would keep getting clipped and getting pulled. Even though I had a tight fist, my wrist, I wasn't landing with my knuckles, I was landing with this part right here. And I was sometimes landing with these outside knuckles, and you really have to learn how to just dig properly and really get those knuckles turned into the punch. That's something you have to train. And that's something, again, everyone always talks about the value of combat sports is train things against a resisting partner in a contact situation. Kyokushin is the only combat sport that I've ever done, that I've ever found, that lets me go train full contact bare knuckle punches, which is what I would use in a lot of situations, against a resisting opponent. So to detract the value of that, because they don't do face punches, and then to throw the whole system out is idiotic. Now, again, another thing that Kyokushin gives you is a grading system. You have a pathway to where you're going, which is, again, something very valuable for a lot of people. I respond well to when I understand, like, I've accomplished something, I've accomplished something, I've accomplished something. Not everyone needs that, but I like a grading system. I liked it in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I did Sambo. They didn't have the same kind of grading system. You just became a master of sport. And it was a different feeling. I wanted to understand my progression, what I had to do to get there, and I wanted to have goals to hit. For me, that helps me train. For a lot of people, I think that might help them train. That's something else to take into consideration. Another thing to take into consideration, which is very important, is head trauma. When you're doing Muay Thai, you're doing boxing all the time, unless you're doing it at a very light, controlled pace, which is hard to find. You always get guys in the gym who hit hard. You will eventually develop some kind of side effect from getting punched in the head repeatedly. I say this from experience. I get migraines. There were times where I would spar, and for like a week after sparring, I would just like hear water. I don't know how to explain it, but there was like water sounds in my jaw. And this wasn't even necessarily hard sparring. Then I'd have brain fog when I would go hard for like, we're not talking about like brain fog for a day. I'd have brain fog for a month. Like it would slow me down. And I'm not a competitive elite level guy who's going and fighting in combat sports. I'm a guy who was sparring in the gym, going hard sometimes, going medium sometimes, but trying to go light a lot of the time. And just getting clipped now and then. And it would actually add up tremendously, more than people realize. It does not take a lot to hurt your brain. What Kyokushin gave me as an alternative, which is actually one of the reasons I was happy to get into it initially, it gave me the ability to spar very hard without fear of head trauma. And you look at a lot of karate guys, they're still doing it in their 70s. There's guys doing it in their 80s. You don't see a lot of other martial arts that produce people who can still train consistently in their 70s and 80s. I mean, it's just not something you see. And these guys in their 70s are tough, and they're still giving each other body shots. It's the weirdest thing. And so, again, the benefits of Kyokushin, I'd say, bare knuckle training, incredibly valuable. Teaches you to be a good shell fighter if you're the type of person who will go cross-train and understands the limitations of the sport. It gives you incredible conditioning, the best out of any martial art I've ever trained. I mean that. Kyokushin gave me the best conditioning out of any martial art I've ever trained. And I'm not a high-level Kyokushin guy. I do it as a hobby to complement my other stuff. Mental toughness, and also the ability to train without head trauma, unless you're getting kicked in the head, which has happened to me in Kyokushin. But the negatives are the no head punching, no grappling. I'm not even putting as an example, because go train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, go train Sambo, go train wrestling if you want to grapple. Don't look for grappling in a striking style. And if you're deciding between Kyokushin and Muay Thai, I would say those are the factors you should take into account. What I would also say is don't just discredit Kyokushin as a useless sport. It's as a useless art. It's an incredible art, in my opinion. It offers tremendous value that you can't find in other martial arts. So definitely try class. Even if you're a Muay Thai guy, go try class, and don't go in with an ego. Just go trade these bare knuckle body punches with some tough Kyokushin guys. So does karate suck? No. And I'll do another video on Shotokan, because I have a whole story about Shotokan as well. But for me, Kyokushin definitely does not suck. And that's to Icy Mike. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he made the original video that I saw like 3 years ago saying Kyokushin sucks because it lacks head punches, which in my opinion is a very naive or limited view of looking at the style and what it has to offer. Not as a Kyokushin fanboy, as a Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, combat sports guy who's big into self-defense and has trained numerous people all over the world. Subscribe, by the way. Do that. Hit the button.